at a ceiling set at 10 trillion, the fiscal deficit gap, it's important that a paradigm shift in debt ceiling be adopted. In the MTDS, the ministry proposed a 50-50 of external that is foreign and internal debt, domestic borrowings as contained in the 2023 MTDS. That will be a very good program. The multiplier effect of the investment and saving, the determination of the debt financing for government based on the 50% net external borrowing and the 50% net domestic borrowings will eventually spur private investment as government borrowings from the domestic market through the fiscal investment, such as treasury bonds and bills, will have been capped as no crowding effect. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I support the report of the Select Committee of Public Debt and Privatization Committee.
The Honorable Member for Mosop Constituency, Honorable Abraham Kirua.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity that you've given me so that I can contribute also to this policy and financial resolution relating to the 2023 medium-term debt management strategy. I want to commend on the committee for a great job that they did in preparing this particular report and also sitting down and looking exactly where we are as a country in terms of this debt. Madam Speaker, this country is in a hole. And they say when you find yourself in a hole or in a deep, the best you can do is to stop digging and make your way up. It is truly unfortunate that there are several circumstances that led into this huge appetite of borrowing. And one of them, of course, is the pandemic, that we had. Also, the instability of the shilling. The interest rate all over the world is going up. The inflationary rate has gone up. So it has truly forced the nation to just continue borrowing. And as well, the issues of drought, which we've not had a chance, we've never seen this in a long time. So finding ourselves in this situation, the best we can do as a nation is to find ourselves what can we do to get ourselves out of this debt situation. And I want to comment on one of the policy resolutions that was proposed and what was brought forward by the committee, that we are going to, that any borrowing undertaken by the National Treasury for the financial year 2023-2024 should not exceed the approved debt ceiling set by Parliament, which we know, all of us, it was approved at 10 trillion shillings. As we speak, Madam Speaker, our debt is way almost above the debt ceiling that was set. And as such, the cabinet, some way, somehow, and I know it has not made it to this house, approved to change from now having a numerical figure to going to do to base our debt on debt anger. If we base our debt on debt anger, as it is now, we are at 67% of GDP. And if we are saying that we are going to go back to base our debt on this particular anger, to bring it down to 55% of the GDP, we will not be able to understand, because this GDP will be only, it will be a moving target, because we may not know the truth as to what is actually our GDP as a nation. So I support the committee in just continuing to say, let's stick on numerical figure of the 10 trillion. If we need to sit back as a nation and say, okay, should we increase our debt ceiling? Then it has to be a number that everybody knows. Then if we hit this figure, then we need to stop borrowing. Because we need to live within our means as a nation. We need to live within our means because we are this nation that we continue to borrow because people are giving us money. World Bank is coming in with lucrative amount. People are giving us some, and we are saying, let's continue to borrow so that we can finance our debts. But how long can we continue to borrow? How long should we continue as a nation to borrow if we are not able to increase our exports? Because one of the things we should do as a nation is to increase our exports so that we don't continue borrowing. Also, the interest rate and the inflation in this country has continued to go up. So there has to be a system and there has to be a way that we need to control these inflationary measures. And some of the things that, some of the points that was proposed by the committee, that in order to safeguard against exchange rate fluctuation, the National Treasury should consider hedging mechanism on foreign exchange risk and also negotiating lending agreements in Kenya shillings. Because as a nation, if we don't implement these issues of hedging mechanism, we will end up continuing to just, as we speak, the exchange rate to a dollar is 142 shillings to a dollar. So if we continue like this and we don't have any hedging mechanism, as a nation, we will continue to have an issue with financing our debt. The other issue also that they suggested is that in order to, that the National Treasury undertakes a review on all undisbursed loans amounting to 1.179 trillion and submit to the National Treasury within 1 month. And I support that. A report with information on terms, statutes, reasons for non-disbursement, and proposal on any loans that can be cancelled to save spending on commitment fees. How in the world as a nation did we go ahead and accept money that we are not using? We are talking of money that they say that they've given to us, 1.179 trillion, but it has not been disbursed. So who actually is holding this amount of money? When us as a nation, we actually not using the funds. So I support the proposal by the committee that the Treasury has only 1 month to actually bring the report to this House as to which loans are these that has not been disbursed. Why are we continuing to pay commitment fees on money that we are not using? And can this money be these loans be cancelled? And why should we continue? And then the other issue that I thought was very important as a nation for us to look into is that within 2 months, the National Treasury submit to this House a strategy for resolution of non-performing loans linked to various state-owned corporations. There are several corporations that it say that they have borrowed money, the state has guaranteed, but they cannot account for that amount of money. One of those corporations is KPLC. KPLC is said to have borrowed 9.9 billion, but when the auditor tried to follow up on the money, KPLC is saying, we don't know this amount. So who took the money? So I support the committee in giving the Treasury a short period of time to actually come and explain to us where exactly did this money go. And then the other issue that I want to support, Madam Speaker, is that going forward, the MTDS should live up to its expectation as a medium-term document by showing consistency in proposed debt management strategies on a 3-year rolling framework from one MTDS to another. That way, in the future, we will be able to be responsible as a nation. And the last is the country's borrowing strategy is approved at 50-50, which is a good policy and it's a good practice. But unfortunately, as a nation, the amount of money we are borrowing from within is at about 72%. What we are borrowing from foreign is domestic is 72%, and foreign debt is at 28%. And we all understand the money that we borrow from foreign is a lot cheaper. The interest rate is about 3%, but the domestic interest rate is about 13%. So we end up spending way too much money borrowing from within And so for us to bring it to a 50-50, it will take a serious fiscal responsibility from the nation and from the Treasury, and have a good plan to bring it to 50-50. As it is, from 72% domestic and 28% foreign is not going to be of any help as of now. So I support this proposition by the committee, Madam Speaker, that we adopt and we accept this resolution so that we can address the issues of debt in this nation. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute, and I support.
Member for Bondo, Honorable Gideon Ochanda. The Honorable Member for Kilifi.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to debate the medium-term debt management strategy. Medium debt strategies the world over are put in place in order to review and to see how best we can have debt that is at a lower cost, manageable, and something that can be serviced. So this practice that is coming to the House, probably this is the first time that we're having this, and I want to commend the chairman and his committee for this good job. And I want to say that, going forward, this is where you hold government at account. The accountability of government starts in the House. And one of the things that we have lacked a mechanism to bring accountability to is debt management. But I think the 12th Parliament in its wisdom thought that this committee should be put in place, and I think the members of that committee are up to the task and will help this country. Runaway debt has been one of the problems that we have had in this country. And the fourth regime of this country probably was the worst in terms of managing debt. Madam Speaker, if you look at the debt levels, I think we are at 9-point-something trillion. It is something that this country needs to review. Cost of debt. First, there are two things that we need to look at, and I think the committee looked at. One, the debt itself. Secondly, the cost of debt. The cost of debt. The dollar keeps on moving up. The higher the dollar goes, the more interest we pay. Meaning, therefore, the cost of debt keeps on soaring. We are paying more money not because we borrowed more, but just because the dollar is moving up. And I like the recommendation that the committee is making. They're saying we need now to negotiate debt on the basis of the Kenyan shilling, so that because the Kenyan shilling is constant, it is possible to manage the cost of debt. And that is one of the things that we must manage as a country, the cost of debt. I want to commend the committee for saying, let us negotiate our debt based on the Kenyan shilling and not the dollar. And that way we'll be able to reduce the cost of debt. The second important thing that comes out of this committee, which I support, there are very many MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies, that have different accounts, and they have a lot of money there. But when you ask the country in the CFS, how much money do we have? We don't have money, and yet each ministry, each MDA has some money there lying out there. It is not being used. The financial year is over. There is money being held in all these many MDAs, totaling to hundreds of billions of dollars. But what happens to that money? We go and look for fresh money and come and put in here. They will not use the money again. We will still have a debt we have accrued. At the end of the, again, on the other hand, we have interest we are paying on. We are saying, let's have one treasury account. So that at one given time, you'll be asking, how much money does this government have currently? You'll be able to say, this treasury account, this one treasury account has this much money, and therefore government is not broke. But today you ask people, you ask government mandates, they say, government is broke. It doesn't have money. But if you ask, there is 100 billion here, there's 200 million here, there's 100. If we consolidate this in one treasury account, we shall reduce borrowing in this country. And that is important. Madam Speaker, another very important thing is government borrowing its own money? is government borrowing its own money at a higher interest, because this money is littered all over. And if it is littered all over, government says they don't have money, this ministry doesn't have money, but this other ministry has a lot of money. You go to borrow to finance this project, and yet Department of Roads has 500 billion. It is not using it, it is just in the account, but the Department of Water requires 100 million. It goes to borrow that for water, and yet this other department here has money. So what happens? This money is in our commercial banks. This money lies there. What happens is government goes to borrow the same money that belongs to it. We pay more interest. Banks, commercial banks benefit out of it. And yet, if we had one treasury account, I want to commend that policy resolution that this government requires to have one treasury account, just like the PFMA Act says. This must be implemented and must be implemented now to save Kenyans this issue of debt. One of the things that you need to look at debt is, how do you balance transgeneration debt? How do you balance transgeneration debt? If you have a good medium-term plan on debt management, then you'll be able to say, my father paid this amount, I will pay this, my children will pay this, my grandchildren will pay this. But we cannot take all the money, all the debt, and give it to only one generation that comes later to pay the debt. We need to look at that. And debt management strategy will help a country to look at the transgenerational debt so that we are able to secure the future of our children and our children's children. But if we don't do that, and if this practice that we are trying, to start today here in this parliament must be entrenched in law properly so that we do not burden our grandchildren with debt. A good medium-term debt strategy will ensure that the transgenerational debt is properly managed and this country will be helped. Madam Speaker, I would like to comment one of the things that the team talked about. Deviations from approved ceilings, deviations. It's in the 12th Parliament that it was almost war here when we were to agree on how high or how low we were to take the debt. You know, I remember the BPS had its own debt, and then I think the budget had its own, and the question is, which one should come first? I remember that argument here. And during the time when now we had to make a decision on increasing the ceiling, it was fireworks here. If a country and if a parliament can only pass debt management strategy without consensus, I think there is a problem. But I think this thing that we are trying to anchor, that we have a committee does this work, we are going to remove this thing of deviations. Deviations. It should not be at the whim of a president. It should not be at the whim of the guy at Treasury. It is this parliament that needs to say, we have said no, you can't borrow, look at what you have and run this country. That is what we need to look at. And that is the objective way to ensure that we run a good fiscal management policy, we run a good a treasury without having to twist members here and there for us to be able to borrow. Madam Speaker, fundamentally, this constitution is anchored on public participation. Public participation is a fundamental thing in our constitution. The debt ceilings and whatever we do never goes to the people. But I like this that you are introducing. If you must borrow and if you must make a decision to borrow, go to the people and ask them, should we borrow, should we not borrow? We must anchor public participation in our debt management. And that is the only way to safeguard constitutionalism and the principle of constitutionalism. We need to do that. So I want to say that it is very important that going forward, we need to look at public participation when we are managing and when we want to borrow and when a government wants to borrow. Madam Speaker, as I finish my presentation, I want to ask my friends in the minority, this is how to put government to account. It is in this parliament that we need to bring these ideas. It is this government, it is here in this parliament that we can check government using policy papers like this, which the chair of the debt committee, I think, comes from the minority. And this is where democracy is properly anchored, not in mandamanos, and we go to make noise out there in the market. It is in this house. Bring your ideas in this house. Let's refine them. Let's have better governance, because parliament are parliamentarians and people who have been given the mandate by the people sit in this house and argue out things and bring out good policies and laws that can govern this country. This country cannot be governed by what is said in barazas. It cannot be governed by what is said in maandamanos. It is this house that needs to look at the important things on how to run this government. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
This chance will go to the member for Westlands, Honorable Timothy Wanyonyi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me this chance, Madam Speaker. I remember the last time the CS for Treasury came to our committee, Madam Speaker, which you are also a member of that committee, delegated legislation, to convince us on the debt ceiling and why the government needed to borrow more so that they can increase the ceiling, Madam Speaker. He said that they wanted to retire the domestic loan and borrow from an international market, simply because the domestic loan was expensive, Madam Speaker. And he said that once they do that, then they will need no more borrowing because they will have gotten a cheap loan and it will solve the problems they're having. What we know is this government, in a government after government, Madam Speaker, is they don't have the financial discipline. They keep on changing goalposts. Today they're saying this, tomorrow they're saying that. Honorable Deputy Whip of the majority, it is not about Mandamano. Mandamano, people in agitate, is about the government failings. And this is why people go on the street. If the government is telling Kenyans are performing what they promised, Kenyans will have no business going to the street. When Mike Kibaki was there, he never used to speak loudly. He never used to comment on every issue, but he was performing and the economy started working because he was simply did not compromise on some issues. Madam Speaker, the other thing is that the government should stop involving itself in business, because the business of government is not do business. It is to help Kenyans to create wealth, to create opportunities for Kenyans to invest, and also for investors to come from out, come and bring money to our economy. Madam Speaker, we have got so many struggling parastatals, and the government keeps on pouring money there. It's the highest time for us to stop bailing out these struggling parastatals that have been mismanaged over the years, so that either we sell them off or, Madam Speaker, we completely write them off so that the government does not keep on borrowing money there, because that's like a pitless hole that you put money and you'll never know where it's going. Madam Speaker, for us to start now making this economy work, the Treasury, we must have fresh ideas in Treasury. I think for a long time we have people who have no idea how to grow the economy. Their business there is just to look. We make the budget, but they have no idea where they are going to get the money from. And then they start burdening Kenyans with debts. And some of these inflated debts, Madam Speaker, if you look, for example, the SGR, during the Kibaki time, Madam Speaker, that's when the SGR was mooted. And it could have costed us only 32 billion Kenya shillings to build SGR from Mombasa to Malaba. Madam Speaker, a few years later, after Mike Kibaki left, the same SGR cost Kenyans over 400 billion to build SGR from Mombasa to Nairobi. If you look at that percentage, Madam Speaker, it's just abnormal. So until we have a financial discipline, we will continue borrowing. This Kenya Kwanza government, when they came to power, Madam Speaker, they said they'll borrow no more. And since they came now, they are borrowing left, right, and center. I don't think President Ruto should just looking outside, even within the opposition, to find the brains that can help him grow the economy. Not just those sycophants who are seated in his government and have no idea. The current Treasury Secretary, Madam Speaker, he failed when he was the governor of the central bank. I don't know what other ideas he has that now he wants to come and sit in the Treasury and drive our economy. I'm very sure the president can do better than that. And Madam Speaker, I just want to end there and just say that I wish that the government, this will be the last time that we, Madam Speaker, they will come and tell us that they are showing Kenyans that they are doing things above board. There's nothing above board. They want money, and we are going to give them money, but we want them to show us how now to create money from within. And Kenya is not a poor country. We can generate money. And if we do, we invest our ideas properly, Madam Speaker, we will bring this debt thing to a control. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me a chance to speak on this.
Thank you, Honorable Timothy. This chance goes to the member for Bonchari, Honorable Charles Onchoke.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The report by the Standard & Poor on Kenya's creditworthiness shows that Kenya is not doing well on a number of parameters, on solvency, on liquidity, and so on. What that means in terms of public debt is that the rate or the cost of borrowing for Kenya is going to be higher wherever you're going to be approaching for debt. Right from the onset, when you look at the accuracy of our numbers, I have some questions. The definition of public debt by the IMF through the debt sustainability framework or analysis includes the national government debt or the central government debt, the corporations, the guarantees, and all of that, which is also repeated in the Constitution of Kenya. However, a number of other debts are excluded, such as the social security debts, the pensions, provident funds. They must be paid. People have contributed to these funds. When time is due, they must be paid, and yet they don't form part of the public debt. The pending bills are hardly included in this formulation. We know that the counties get their funds from government, from the country Kenya, and so that a county that is owing money to anybody, to the vendors, to suppliers, whenever it gets its allocation, is going to pay off those debts. Meaning, if a county were to default, government must pay. Therefore, those debts must be part of the total sum of public debt, which is excluded. Now, looking at the proposals or strategies which have been recommended in this statement, in this report, one of them is that we adopt a 50-50 ratio of external and domestic debt, so that we reduce borrowing from the domestic market and borrow from outside. Now, at the same time, we are told even at 72 against 28, there is a big problem. You know, we are not able to absorb the 1.179 trillion shillings, and therefore we are paying commitment fees where we are not using these resources. What I would have loved to see, Madam Speaker, is a strategy on how to deal with the poor absorption rate. So if we are going to increase our external borrowing and yet the absorption rate is low, we are not solving the problem. Therefore, we need to have a strategy. We need to find a way of how to deal with the poor absorption rate by our agencies or ministries that are expected to be implementing the programs upon which the borrowings are made. There is a proposal regarding hedging mechanism for foreign exchange risks. This is a mechanism used normally by private sector. Governments hardly use it. This is, for the most part, uncharted waters, and it must be used very, very cautiously so that we don't find ourselves in other scandals like you've seen in the past, like the golden bag. Therefore, we would expect more work to be done so that we don't find the government finding itself in even higher obligations of the public debt. And besides the proposal that you go 50-50, I would have loved to understand what studies have been made so that it's 50-50 and not 40-60, for example. Why is 50-50 the right number to go by? The non-performing loans, which have been a problem for many years, still continue to haunt us, and they're here with us, and they still form part of the public debt. Yet you're having very many corporations that are performing poorly, that are borrowed over the years, and government has guaranteed their borrowing, and the debts are due for repayment. And obviously, legally, the government is obliged to pay those debts. And for the longest, we have had many studies, many task forces that have been created to look at the issues afflicting, or the problems afflicting these corporations, so that we find a lasting solution. But what we are seeing is an increase of these corporations, sort of going deep down and restructuring them, finding the ones that are not performing, the ones that have performed their mandate and it's no longer relevant. They are maybe, we get them out of our books and probably keep the ones that we think we need. So there is need to cut out a very detailed study so that our corporations are the ones that we need, and not just employment bureaus for purposes of rewarding certain quarters. Now, there is a proposal suggestion that we can borrow concessional loans so that we can pay obligations that are matured. Remember that our creditworthiness has been downgraded, and we are talking about looking at the possibility of accessing concessional loans. That's going to be a very difficult route to go. Therefore, we need to think of an alternative route, and that we denominate our loans in local currency, the shillings. If you are borrowing in a yen, you are borrowing a euro, I'm not very sure that those creditors are going to be willing to denominate those loans in shillings. The single treasury account, which is provided for under Section 28, subsection 2 of the Public Finance Management Act, it's been here for the last almost 12 years, and yet we have not used it, we have not operationalized it. It doesn't make sense that it continues being in the books. What we should be talking about is to give Treasury a timeline by which this should be implemented, so that we have a single treasury account, so that all the monies from the various agencies, the various ministries, go under the same account, so that we don't find a situation where the government is borrowing its money from the market. The absorption rate that is very poor, we should find a strategy. There should be a recommendation on how this should be dealt with, so that we don't borrow and keep money, or we don't access the money, but on the other hand, we are paying the commission fees or commitment fees. Another factor that affects the public debt is the inflation and the interest rates, which have been spoken to. If you look at the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, a report of February, our inflation is going up, it's not going down, and we would have loved to see some measures are recommended by this committee to tame our inflation, which is affecting our public debt. Government expenditure, of course, is going up, it's ballooning, which is going to be one of the major sources of inflation. I would have loved to see measures, strategies of containing the ever-expanding government expenditure on recurrent purposes. Madam Speaker, I hope that as this report, as these strategies are going to be implemented, we take into account some of these suggestions are coming from the floor of the House, and I thank you.
Thank you. The Deputy Minority Leader, Honorable Robert Mbui.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity. First, Madam Speaker, I want to say that this is an excellent job that has been done by the committee, newly formed Committee of Public Debt and Privatization. In fact, Madam Speaker, I'm happy to have been part of last Parliament where we made a decision that the issue of public debt needs to have its own standalone committee so that matters public debt can be sorted out properly. Madam Speaker, I think it is because of the history we've had with the National Treasury, which has been a very big letdown in many ways. Because, Madam Speaker, even when I look at one of the things that they have said, that this debt strategy is based on the assumption that over the medium term, the economy will recover with stable macroeconomic variables, revenue collections will improve, and fiscal balance will decline. You know, I ask myself that these same Treasury mandarins are the same ones that just before we went on the last recess came and told us that as a house, and this is a promise to the nation, that they'll be able to release 2 billion for CDF. They couldn't even project that, you know, and several times they have actually defaulted on that agreement. So I ask myself, are we really in safe hands when it comes to people managing our money? Madam Speaker, on the issue of strategy, strategy is just a matter of figuring out where you're coming from, where you are, and maybe you can project where you're going. Now, where have we come from? On the matter of Treasury, I have been in this house when the debt ceiling has increased about 3 or 4 times. Madam Speaker, I remember seconding the motion to increase the debt ceiling from, I think, something to 9 trillion. I remember the figure that we were going up to. And Treasury came and told us that the reason they wanted to increase the debt ceiling was because at that point, they had borrowed close to the ceiling that was already in place. And so the proposal was that they are not increasing the debt ceiling so that they can borrow more. They're increasing the debt ceiling so that they can settle very expensive domestic loans, so that they can get cheaper loans for externally. Unfortunately, after we increased that debt ceiling to 9 trillion, they borrowed up to 9 trillion and came back again to the house to increase it to 10 trillion where we are now. I know that in the next, in the next short while, they might even attempt to come back to change it. We did approve, and I agree we were there when we approved it. But where are we now? You know, Madam Speaker, I've read through the report, and I want to observe some things that I've seen in this report that makes me wonder whether we really know actually even how much we really owe. Because the committee report on number 4 states that it is actually 9.15 trillion as at December 2022. And the same period, number 16 says it was 8.907.7 trillion. Number 25 of this same report, the Office of the Comptroller of Budget places our budget as 9.17 trillion. Treasury, in number 54, sets it at 9.14 trillion. I mean, there are 4 figures that are actually in that report, indicating that we may have a problem, even figuring out the exact amount that we owe as a country. But then, the Office of the Auditor General says this in their recommendation to the committee, that there is no specific financial statements that are prepared to show the country's debt position. How can we be operating as a country? Even a small business, a kiosk owner, knows exactly what they owe and how much and when it is due. How can we operate a country that way? Madam Speaker, the Auditor General also says that there is non-disclosure of all Government of Kenya guaranteed obligations. In fact, the word they should have used is opaque. There is no transparency in knowing our financial obligations. Madam Speaker, that means that then we do not even know sometimes maybe what we have put up as collateral. Madam Speaker, we must cut our cloth depending on our size. Our budget proposal, 3.7 trillion. Our revenue collection, 2.9 trillion. Are already a deficit of 720 billion. How long are we going to live like this? I will tell you this, that if this was a personal budget of a home, that person would have their property auctioned. You cannot be living beyond your means continuously, year in, year out. And you're borrowing and you cannot even be able to pay. We are actually borrowing ourselves into a hole and we are continuing to dig. Madam Speaker, Kenya's public debt sustainability analysis shows that our debt carrying capacity was downgraded from strong to medium, and now with a very high risk of debt distress. When a country reaches there, it means that it may be unable to pay its debts, which means that is when you see countries losing their installations, losing their property to other countries that have lent to them. So, Madam Speaker, we have to be very, very careful. But I remember during the last elections, I was very happy because I was listening to both sides of the political divide. And on top of those huge 4-wheel drive, fuel guzzling, top of the range vehicles, leaders were saying that if they manage to get into office, they will not borrow. And now the strategy that I'm getting here is that we are going to borrow 50% domestic, 50% foreign. I mean, I thought that means we are borrowing. The idea of not borrowing should have been real. Maybe we need to figure out what do we cut out And I was happy when the president came in and said he wants to reduce the budget by about 300 billion, which he didn't succeed. But now is the time maybe he needs to bite the bullet and decide what must be cut from this budget so that we can live within our means. We cannot continue borrowing forever. Now, even when you look at the issue of 50-50, the same report says that borrowing domestically is not good because, one, there are higher interest rates, there is a shorter maturity period, there is a higher portion of debt servicing cost within the total, the total amount of debt. But at the same time says, no, for external debt is even worse because there is a risk, it's risky because of the exchange rate risk. So I'm wondering, you are saying both of them are bad, then why borrow? Anyway, Madam Speaker, there is a problem with the system or the manner in which we are borrowing. And I think maybe we need to figure out, is there a way that some people can be held accountable? There's this issue where commitment fees are being paid for undisbursed loans. A loan has been borrowed, it's not been taken, we have not touched it, but we are already paying commitment fees. The first half of 2022-23, incidentally, Treasury paid 680.3 million on commitment fees. Not a single cent has been put into the projects. Madam Speaker, for how long do we need to do that? This can be avoided if the people that we are borrowing for, those implementing agencies, can do the following things, because they've been advised. Before any signing of any loan, there must be some order. First and foremost, if it is something that is going to be built on land, acquire the land. How do you borrow? Then you have the money in the account, you don't have the land. Now you start trying to figure out where do we get the land. Before you borrow, ensure that if there is money that you're going to contribute, because there is also some disbursements, some money that you're supposed to counter-fund. If there's some money you're supposed to be able to put in, have it ready so that immediately you can be able to put in your share and the money is released, all of it. Updates and designs, feasibility studies must be ready. So, Madam Speaker, it's very, very important that we figure out, can we hold some certain individuals responsible? And I think the former Treasury CS may have been in court because some of these problems. Because why would you spend money before we are ready? And you remember the case of Kimwarer and Aro Dam, where money was released and yet were not ready for the project. In fact, even the people that live on that land or around that land didn't know a mega project was coming there. So, Madam Speaker, I think it is important that we organize ourselves as a country so that we can be able to get out of this hole. Now, Madam Speaker, the issue of establishing a sinking fund is also critical. And Madam Speaker, it is also because we have already borrowed quite a lot. And if some of these loans become due and we are not prepared, then we will suddenly become insolvent. So it's important that we ensure that we have a sinking fund, a fund where you keep putting money, so that the time those loans mature, they can be sorted out without any pressure, undue pressure on the economy. So this, I think, is a brilliant idea that needs to be encouraged, that needs to be even started, not even now, not even today, but yesterday. Madam Speaker, I note from the report that county governments have also been borrowing, and they have been borrowing, and the cost of those loans is not part of the budget. So, Madam Speaker, we may need to agree with the committee that before county governments can borrow, they must get some guarantee from government. They must be approved so that they don't go out of the way and spend money which is not approved by Parliament. Otherwise, Madam Speaker, with those few remarks, I wish to support the committee's report.
Thank you. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for this opportunity. Honorable Speaker, allow me to first thank the Public Debt Committee under the chairmanship of the Honorable Abdi Shuria and vice chairmanship of Honorable Makali. Because members will note this is the second report within a very short time that this committee has been able to churn out. And being a new committee of this House, it tells you that these are members who are very committed in their work. And I just want to take this opportunity to commend them for having prepared this report. And Honorable Speaker, you see the wisdom that there was in this House in the 12th Parliament when we separated the Budget and Appropriations Committee and the Debt Committee to be two separate committees. And indeed, Honorable Speaker, the timing of this report is a testament to that wisdom of the House then to even ensure that the debt management strategy comes right before the budget policy statement, so that it informs how we prepare our budget policy statement and consequently the budget annual estimates that will be coming before the House towards the end of April, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, if you look through some of the recommendations by the committee, especially on policy resolutions, I would want to express my satisfaction with many of these resolutions and indeed support of this report. Particularly, Honorable Speaker, when you look at the issue of undisbursed loans that my brother, the Honorable Robert Mbui, was speaking about. And it is indeed true that in the past we have seen government make commitments for insurance, for commitment fees, and those loans remain in our books. And if you look at the committee's report, they are telling us an amount of 1.179 trillion lies in our books as undisbursed loans. And I am very happy with the recommendation that the National Treasury to submit to the National Assembly within 1 month a report with information on terms, the status, reasons for non-disbursement, and proposals on any loans that can be cancelled to save spending on commitment fees. Honorable Speaker, it's not just about the fees and the insurance that some of these loans come with, Honorable Speaker, but also the debt burden, Honorable Speaker, and the refinancing costs of some of these loans, Honorable Speaker. Because once in a while, you may need to pay further commitment fees and insurance fees over loans that are yet to be disbursed, and therefore we are not enjoying the value of those loans. Honorable Speaker, more importantly, this almost 1.2 trillion shillings lies in our books, but it is money that we are not able to consume. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, what that means is that we are reporting a debt ceiling of 10 trillion, which we are almost busting, and out of whatever 9.15 trillion that we had borrowed as of December, 1.2 trillion lies in our books over loans that are yet to disburse. And it's only fair that the National Treasury now, immediately after the passage of this report, embarks on a process to ensure that they clean up our books. If a loan is not disbursable, the best thing to do is to do away with that loan and allow provision for us to be able to borrow, to do those things where we can disburse money and we'll be able to absorb the loans into our economy and be able to grow our economy. Honorable Speaker, you're aware, many of our contractors today, in all our constituencies, we have contractors who are doing roads and other projects who have downed their tools because of non-payment. And maybe if we had the opportunity to get 1.2 trillion shillings, we borrow 1.2 trillion shillings to go into productive work of ensuring that all the roads that have been commissioned and contracted for get back to work. That 1.2 trillion shillings, the multiplier effect on the economy will be huge. And even the revenue generation, but just having those debts in our books are not helping as a country. Honorable Speaker, the second element that I want to support in this report is the issue of the single treasury account. And it is sad that over the years, at least in the last 6 years, even when I was chair of the Budget and Operations Committee in 2018, this is a recommendation we had in our report, that the National Treasury must ensure there is a single treasury account, because that is the only way we can optimize on our cash flows, Honorable Speaker. Even in your own small households, we are only able to account for how much money we have in liquid, or rather liquid cash, if you're able to put your money together and know this is how much I have, and be able to prioritize as you budget, where can I apply the resources I have today? But Honorable Speaker, let us also not lie to each other. The truth is that as much as we insist on government having a single treasury account, the biggest impediment to a single treasury account are our state corporations, the SAGAs, the semi-autonomous government agencies. Honorable Speaker, because many of these SAGAs are using the huge resources they have to be able to negotiate with commercial banks, private commercial banks, for kickbacks over government deposits. And government is going back to the same banks to borrow. And I have no fear, Honorable Speaker, even in mentioning some of these sagas, if you look at the Kenya Roads Board, for instance, you'll find at every one single month, they have close to 15 to 20 billion shillings they are keeping in private commercial banks. Yet the same government that has disbursed this money to them through fuel levy is going back to the same commercial banks to borrow. And Honorable Speaker, if you want to know the genesis of corruption in state corporations, it is in the mobilization of deposits on where they will deposit. No wonder, Honorable Speaker, in the 12th Parliament, when I came up with a bill to try and limit where government banks, Honorable Speaker, the resistance was so huge that that bill could never see the light of day. But we cannot give up. We cannot afford to give up, Honorable Speaker. And we must pursue, we either have a single treasury account or we limit where government banks, government ministries, departments, or agencies of government, either to bank with the government-owned banks, and therefore government that doesn't need to go back to private commercial banks to borrow. But anyway, Honorable Speaker, due to the state capture that existed before, all these things sounded like songs. And indeed today, even as we pontificate about borrowing, and I did hear the deputy leader of minority ask, are we not borrowing? Yes, we are borrowing. At 50-50, as a committee proposes, I support. And the honorable leader of minority, deputy leader of minority, my brother Robert was asking, why is it then every other leader committed during the campaign that we shall not borrow? And I want to correct you, Robert. When I listened to the Kenya Kwanza leader, the current president, the legitimately elected president, President William Ruto, he never said he shall not borrow, but he said we shall do so in a responsible manner, not borrowing in an irresponsible manner as the previous regime was doing. And indeed, the president asserted when he was being sworn in that we are in an economic hole and in a debt hole. And the most foolish thing that we could do as a country is not to continue digging into that hole.
There is a point of order from Honorable Patrick.
I am sure there is nothing out of order.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, with a lot of respect of the leader of majority, just say that there is a legitimate elected president. Is he insinuating that there is another one who is illegitimately elected, Madam Speaker? Is he in order?
You have put your point of order, Honorable Makau.
You know, Honorable Speaker, the former mayor from Avoko, I know English might be a problem to him. Because there's nothing wrong with asserting that the president we have is a legitimately elected president. I did not say there is another president, and there cannot be another president. I know he was hoping that I would affirm that there is a people's president who is always fond of swearing himself in. I am not in that line of thought, the member from Avoko. Honorable Speaker, you'll add me a minute because of that interruption. Honorable Speaker, I was saying we must borrow and borrow so responsibly. And that is what this government has committed to. That when the president asserted that we will not continue digging in the debt hole is because of the irresponsible borrowing that was going on. And the assertion, he followed up that with the supplementary estimates with cutting our expenditure and towards fiscal consolidation, cutting 300 billion shillings. I want to confirm to the House and to the country that that actually did happen. And indeed, even as we wait without anticipating debate on the budget policy statement, the reason and only reason why the chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee and members of the committee are not in this House today is because they are still cracking the numbers to ensure one.
1 more minute, Majority Leader, you wind up.
Honorable Speaker, I was saying they are still cracking the numbers to ensure that the BPS statement that comes before this House, one, is aligned to the value chain, a value chain-oriented budget policy statement that takes money to our priority areas as the Kenya Kwanza government, something that we failed to do in the last regime. We kept talking about the Big Four agenda, a Big Four agenda that had no resources being committed to it. But this time we want to ensure that our budget policy statement speaks to the value chain-oriented budgeting that we are talking about. We want to ensure that even the annual estimates will speak to what we are saying. When we speak about fiscal consolidation, Honorable Speaker, it will not just be about talk. And that is why this government, Honorable Speaker, with the first supplementary budget And I was saying that in response to the Honorable Robert Mbui was asking, why are we borrowing? We would have borrowed at least up to 6.2%. We have reduced, rather, our fiscal deficit was at 6.2%. The World Bank, IMF had allowed us up to 6.8%. We have brought that down under the supplementary estimates 1 to 5.7%. And if you look at the figures in this report, towards a fiscal consolidation to ensure that our fiscal deficit goes all the way to about 3.3% in another 3 years in the medium term. Therefore, Honorable Speaker, let me support this report and urge the House that we must be vigilant. We must ensure that the National Treasury indeed makes this single Treasury account a reality. That fiscal consolidation, Honorable Speaker, must become a reality in this country. That the questions of state capture and corruption in government and in state corporations, Honorable Speaker, must come to an end, because without that, then we continue digging into the debt hole. Honorable Speaker, in conclusion, we anticipate in the coming few days, the Cabinet having approved the debt anchor ratio, that will change.
Thank you, Majority Leader. This will go to, the chance will go to the member for Wajir, Honorable Fatuma. Is she in the House? If not in the House, we will have the Honorable Member for Sotik. Not in the House. Yeah, and maybe this to the clerks. Whoever we call and is not there, let them be moved from the system so that I see who is in the House. Member for Seme, Honorable Dr. James Nyikao.
House. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, let me also congratulate the 12th Parliament for establishing this committee. And as much as I may not agree with the current leader of majority who was very instrumental in bringing this issue, it has become a very important point in the debt management. Madam Speaker, the problem we had over the years is we were not managing our debt, and it was not part of our financial process, particularly the budget process. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, me in principle, the fact that we have a committee now that is dealing with the debt management, and that this has also linked it to parliamentary processes, so that the elected people have a say on when we are borrowing. Borrowing, people will always borrow. There's no problem with it, but we must say, what are we borrowing for? And Parliament must have a say in it. The other important principle in this, Madam Speaker, is that we have linked this process, the debt management, to the budget process. This is extremely important because borrowing is actually to fill the budget gap, the budget deficit. And therefore, the process must be linked with the budget process. And, Madam Speaker, why I also must congratulate this committee, it has done that. It has also brought recommendations, policy measures, and financial measures that we need to take. And, Madam Speaker, this report is not just a report for this budget year. Madam, this report is a report that must be implemented and be part of our process from now on. I see the chair of the committee is here, and the chair of the committee of this, I congratulate you, but know that you have given a strategy not only for this year, but which must be followed throughout. Madam Speaker, the fact that we have linked it to the budget process, and particularly before we have the budget policy statement, is extremely important, so that when we are doing the budget policy and looking at the strategies, we input what we need in debt and how that debt is going to be managed and how the past debts have been managed. Therefore, Madam Speaker, in principle, and for those reasons, I think support this. But more importantly, you look at the solutions that they have provided. We have talked about the single treasury account. Madam Speaker, what is important here is actually local domestic borrowing, because domestic borrowing crowds out the business people who borrow actually to generate money. And therefore, government is competing with business. And like that, we cannot actually grow our economy. We also now realize that MDAs, the sagas are actually putting money which is resting there. So we are borrowing our own money. And Honorable Chunga is saying here, I would say he was linking this to state capture. But I'll tell him, if he's hearing or not, that state capture is already happening. He may not be aware how state capture happens, but we are seeing the process going on very neatly. State capture starts by picking people to head institutions, people who are beholden to you, people who will not follow the law, people who will wait for instructions. Once you have that, state capture is on. And I think this is free advice to them, and they should realize that as you talk about it, they are actually indulging it. The process is starting now. But I agree with that recommendation. We shouldn't borrow locally as much as we can. It crowds out. I can't go through all of them, but Madam Speaker, if you look at the issue of currency exchange fluctuations, it's obvious if you borrow and pay in dollars, you're generating money in Kenya shillings. You actually are at a loss before you start. And so that recommendation, Madam Speaker, I agree with. Now, when you look at loans where we are paying commitment fees, I've been in the system and I know how this works. The main thing about commitment fee is actually unpreparedness at the time you are taking the loan. You want to implement a project, you have not done the basic background on what it's going to do, and then the other element that then complicates it, the people we borrow from are aware that we are not ready, and at the time of negotiations, we don't put this as a condition. They put it under condition that we give you, but before we start disbursing, you will pay commitment. They know very well that it will take us along. Sometimes the loan itself comes with conditions that makes it difficult to start, like the structures you need to put in place. Sometimes you find that the government structures as they are not being used to implement a loan. New structures need to be in place. And if you don't take that into consideration early, it will take you a year or two to put new structures before the loan disbursement starts. In should I like the recommendation that they are telling us issues that we within 2 months, the national for solutions of non-performing loans. Again, these are things that we're going through the budget. We do not know of non-performing loans. We are paying for them. I think I really support that. You undertake sensitivity analysis and the mid-term contingency plan on measures to undertake because you can't budget process, and now that is when you are starting to look at how you do. That is if you look at the